In South Sudan and Kenya, the presence of arbitrary arrests and unlawful detentions looms large. According to recent UN reports, thousands of individuals find themselves ensnared in a web of injustice, often without clear charges or due process. This is not just a statistic, it's a stark reality that affects families, communities, and the very fabric of society. Freedom is not a gift, it is a right. A poignant reminder from human rights advocates underscores the urgency of this issue. In South Sudan, the situation is dire, with reports indicating that over 1,000 people were detained without trial last year alone. Meanwhile, in Kenya, the government faces mounting pressure to address similar abuses, as civil society organizations call for accountability and reform. As we delve deeper into this pressing matter, we must ask ourselves, what can be done to protect the rights of the vulnerable?
I'm going to start with you, Prof. Interestingly, a UN human rights violation, a UN statement a report did come out just a couple of hours ago, stating arbitrary arrests and detentions that have consistently been on in South Sudan. First off, what do you make of these human rights violations, even across South Sudan and some parts of Africa, like you would possibly be aware of?
I think that's a serious issue, because when African countries got their independence 60 years ago, one of the things that the leaders promised was freedom. That would be free to invest where they want, to travel where they want, to think the way they want, to do what they want, to associate with who they want. So to see such freedoms being curtailed 60 years after independence is not very nice. And when you start curtailing people's freedom, arbitrary arrest and so on, that has consequences beyond just politics. It is going to stop investors coming to your country. It is going to make the best brains leave the country. It is going to make people live in fear instead of using freedom to pursue their interest and get their potential. So whether it is in Sudan, whether it is Nigeria or Kenya or any other part of the country, I think it's a time we put a lot of emphasis on freedom, so that children, adults and everybody do what they are supposed to do, as long as it is not illegal, exploit their talents, exploit their potential, and contribute to the welfare of the country and uplift the standards of living.
South Sudan, yes, like you've heard the barrister right here in the studio, it's a war-torn country presently, but looking at the future, what can be done to respect human rights in war-torn countries like South Sudan and even some parts of Africa? You would recall as well that some persons were whisked away from a country to another country for some unknown reason. But then, what can be done to get it right in South Sudan when it comes to human rights?
I think we can go back 8 years ago. If you remember, during the Nazi, a lot of war criminals were hanged. They were taken to court. They were sentenced. If you go to Japan, the same happened. So even in a war situation, when people commit crimes, they should be held accountable. Because the barrister will tell you that even as in a state of war, there are laws. There are laws that must be kept. We talk of laws that must be kept in a war situation. But the starting point is, if you look at most of the places where human rights are really violated, there is always an economic aspect. People are fighting for resources. So if Southern Sudan could improve its economy, they have oil, they have a lot of resources. If the leaders can be able to marshal those resources and use them for the national good, without corruption, without pilfering, so that everybody in that country benefits from the economic wealth of that country, then you start seeing inequality, people will have less grudges, and there will be peace. But as the barrister said, people must also be educated on their rights. But Sudan and other African countries will probably not change on their own. I'm one of those people who believe that when it comes to human rights, they are universal. So even other countries, UN, other countries that are bilateral, that trade with Sudan, other countries that are partnership with Southern Sudan, they should always put pressure on Sudan so that they can improve on their human rights. Because the violation of human rights in Sudan or any other country usually spills over to the neighboring countries. Because Kenya, for example, has been having some refugees from Sudan. We have been having some refugees from Somalia. So that might be seen as an internal issue, but in the long run, it affects everybody. So those people that are affected, like the neighboring countries, the trading partners, should put pressure on these countries to improve on human rights. And as you all know very well, the dividends of peace are always better than the dividends of war. So let's put our heads together put pressure on these countries so there is peace, there's economic growth, and I can assure you that as the economy improves, human rights will be respected.
All right, interesting. Before I come to issues coming from your country, the part of the ECOWAS is also there. I'm talking about the Economic Community of West African States and some other African Union, of course, you know. What can the AU do presently to making sure that not only just right, the war in South Sudan is at least quelled to the barest minimum, because it's been ongoing for quite a while, and of course leaving millions away from their homes. What can be done from the African Union as concerning South Sudan? Prof, this question is for you.
I think that's an interesting question, because African Union was formed for such a purpose, to make sure that there is peace among the neighbors, to make sure that even in a dispute between 2 or 3 countries, there's an amicable solution. I remember Kenya participated a lot in coming up with a comprehensive peace agreements for Southern Sudan. But it seems as if they got independence, all the old grudges based on tribe and regions came back to the front, and people have been fighting based on regions and based on tribes. So the African Union should come, intervene. I don't know why they don't have a military force like the United Nations, so that if negotiation can't work, they can enforce. Because if we don't do something about these conflicts, they spill over to the borders. Children are affected, everybody is affected, and even neighboring countries are affected. So I think the African Union should not be just a place where we meet and have summits and meetings, but they should bite, because that's why we contribute to their budget every year. They should have a peacekeeping budget, but I'm sure they have one. Why not put it into use?
Before I maybe ask you this question, I've been longing to ask this question. What's the stance of the Kenyan government as concerning what Barrister just alluded to a few seconds ago, where you have people extradited from your country in Kenya? I mean, it's the second time. First was the person of Nnamdi Kanu of Nigeria, and of course the opposition man from Uganda that was taken from Kenya. There should be some level of bilateral relations to maybe have some level of agreement as regards that. Chime in on this in 1 minute before we go to the Chinese firm situation in your country.
Is that question for me?
Yes, Professor.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because we are also asking the same question, why we have some people living here as refugees being extradited to their country. But in my opinion, it's about the relationship between the Kenyan government and the government that are receiving the person who is being extradited. So I think it's a question of the government-to-government relationship. If it is cordial, if it is very, very good, then you have people being arrested and being extradited to the other countries, which, in my opinion, is not right, because all refugees in whichever country they are protected by international conventions. And that is why I agree with the barrister that what did African Union say about such an issue? What did United Nations say about such an issue? So I think when such issues happen, which are between 2 countries, then we need AU or a supraordinate body to come and condemn and say, this is not right, this should be done this way. But when they keep quiet, they seem to be party to such abductions and such commissions.
Well, thank you so very much, Professor XN Iraqi, a professor with the University of Nairobi in Kenya. We want to say thank you so very much for sharing your time and, of course, your thoughts with us today.
Thank you, and have a good afternoon.
Just like you've heard from these analysts, in South Sudan and Kenya, arbitrary arrests and unlawful detentions are not just statistics, they are grim reality affecting countless lives. This alarming trend raises serious questions about human rights and the rule of law in these nations. In South Sudan, the situation is dire. Reports indicate that government forces routinely detain individuals based on their political affiliations or ethnic backgrounds. This practice not only stifles dissent but also perpetuates a cycle of fear and repression. In Kenya, the landscape is similarly troubling. Security operations often lead to the arbitrary arrest of individuals, particularly during times of unrest. The lack of accountability for these actions is a significant concern. What can be done? Advocacy for legal reforms is crucial. Civil society organizations must work tirelessly to hold authorities accountable. International pressure can also play a pivotal role. Engaging with local communities to raise awareness about their rights is essential. As we reflect on these pressing issues, let's remember that change begins with awareness and action. Together, we can push for a future where justice prevails and every individual's rights are respected. Let's stand together for a brighter tomorrow. Fifi Nthoba for Africa Insight.